Well, hey everybody, John Ripplin here, and this is every WCW Starrcade main event ranked from worst to best. And yes, it is not December or November, when the Starrcade events usually happen. Like the first few happen in November, then the rest happened in December. You may be wondering why you're going to see these pop up here and there. I am burned out on the current product, and I am going to be reflecting back on some stuff that I enjoyed and maybe some stuff I didn't enjoy. The bottom line is I want to reflect back on some times that I really did enjoy wrestling, even though I enjoy a lot about the current product now. So that's why you're going to see some occasional retro review, ranking videos, this kind of stuff. Kind of like you saw during WrestleMania season with, all the WrestleMania ranking videos I did. So I just wanted to explain that right here, but with this, the main event of Starrcade, the show shows whether it was Jim Crockett Promotions or Ted Turner owning WCW, or the 1999 edition when Russo was booking it, and that was pretty shit. Starrcade was seen as the pinnacle, the absolute pinnacle of WCW. And for a number of years it was, actually really until the final couple years, more often than not, Starrcade was a pretty big deal. Now, there were some other ones that weren't all that good during usually the Jim Herd era. Don't worry, I'll get to that. But I thought I'd take a look back at the main events and just see, hey, which ones I enjoyed and which ones I didn't. And some of these weren't always for a title, because your world title shouldn't always be in the main event, or at least that's the way they're thinking. But anyway, let's get on with this. We have number 18. There are 18 events in all from 83 to 2000. So we get number 18, Hulk Hogan versus the Butcher, aka Brutus Beefcake. This is from Starrcade 1994. Brutus fucking the Barber Beefcake was in the main event of a Starrcade. Now, nothing against the guy himself, but that guy was not main event worthy ever at all. He was a fine mid-card guy. He was a decent, heel when he teamed with Greg Valentine as part of the Dream Team in WWE. But by the time he had gotten to WCW, he was Brother Brudai, then he was a Butcher, and then he was a Booty Man, and then he was all this. And who the fuck thought this was a good idea besides Hulk Hogan? Really, this just smacks of creative control and Hogan saying, hey, I'm going to face my buddy and draw a house. And granted, Starrcade 94 did better than some previous events had done, mainly because cost cutting and stuff like that was made. And Hogan and other stars did help bring in some more eyes. This was not a good example of Hogan doing well in WCW. This was a fucking rotten match. It was really goddamn bad. Maybe there are a couple others on this list, work rate wise, that were actually worse, but this, for the fact that Brutus Beefcake, all due respect to the man himself, just the worker, was in a Starrcade main event, this has got to be ranked the worst. Then we go to number 17, Sid Vicious versus Scott Steiner at the last Starrcade 2000. Yeah, not really that good. Both guys were, and I'm sorry, I love Sid, and I love Scott Steiner's honesty, but both guys should have not been facing each other, because it was like oil and water. It just didn't mix, or it was like just two, sides of a magnet that just, do this. It just didn't work. It didn't work at all. Scott Steiner was generally pretty immobile by this point. I mean, he could hit some moves, that was about it. Sid, great power guy, wasn't really, by this point, because he was about 40, wasn't really able to do a ton of stuff. And also, at this point, the WCW title meant absolute shit. Now, in Scott Steiner's possession, around his waist, it actually meant a little more. They were gaining some stability. And until the last Nitro, when Steiner, lost the title to Booker T after WWE had bought the company, he had the championship for about 4.5 months. So that sort of made sense. But at this time, the title still was so freaking butchered from being tossed around to everybody. And after a few weeks and all that stuff, it just didn't fucking work. It really did not fucking work. And that's why it's here at number 17. Number 16, Bret versus Goldberg at Starrcade 1999. Look, work rate wise, this match wasn't that bad. Unfortunately, Bret would suffer, the concussion, in addition to other injuries that he would suffer, but, he would suffer those afterwards. But he suffered a concussion, inadvertent kick, and I'm sure suffered another concussion during this, because there were a couple spots that looked pretty fucking brutal. Goldberg should have not been working with Bret at this point. Now, Goldberg tried, I have, gone past blaming Goldberg for this kind of stuff. Yes, it was his fault in the sense that he did this, but he didn't mean to. It was not, intentional. It was an accident. Accidents happen. I wish Bret had been able to still wrestle. I just don't know how much longer Bret would have wrestled, even though he didn't generally get hurt that often. This match was pretty sloppy, and then Bret even ends up winning the WCW title because, I mean, you had Roddy Piper out there, I believe, as a referee or special guest enforcer. No one knew what the fuck was going on, and just awarded Bret the title. Just awarded him the title during the, the goofy finish and this kind of stuff. And Bret had no goddamn idea what was going on, and yeah, that was the second straight year that Goldberg got screwed over at Starrcade. Great idea there. Whatever. It was what it was. Bret being champion wouldn't have been a bad thing. Had he not suffered that concussion, he could have been a champion for a good while. But that didn't happen. This match is pretty hard to watch. If you go back and watch it knowing that stuff, knowing about the concussions and all that stuff, you can tell Bret was very labored moving around. It was pretty bad. And then we get to number 15, Sting versus the Black Scorpion in 1990. One of the worst things that Ole Anderson did as a booker, because apparently he came up with the idea of various people playing the Black Scorpion. This was Jim Herd wanting, Ric Flair to change his appearance. No, I'm not going to talk about Spartacus. That's right, he wanted him to be Spartacus. And then I just talked about it. Nope, I don't know who was supposed to be the Black Scorpion. I had heard rumors it might have been Al Perez, in interviews and stuff like that, and that would have been a terrible idea. But Ric Flair ended up being the Black Scorpion. And the idea was it was Black Scorpion's mask, because he was a masked wrestler, against Sting's world title. Well, Sting won. It was a steel cage match, a whole big schmoz, and a whole bunch of ridiculous shit. And what happened is, oh no, we sent out the Horsemen and stuff like that. And gee, why are the Horsemen out there to protect the Black Scorpion? Who could it possibly be? It was Ric Flair. He was unmasked, and then the pay-per-view went off the air. Sting and Flair rarely had a bad match. This wasn't bad for what it was, but it was probably the worst match that they'd had. Maybe with the exception of a match they had in Impact, but at that point, those guys were so goddamn old, you wouldn't have expected them to do that much. They were fairly in their prime. I mean, Sting was just really getting started. Hadn't even entered his prime yet. Flair was well established, and this, every goddamn gimmick and every goddamn bullshit thing was done, and it was pretty fucking bad. So then we go to number 14, which is Battle Bowl 92. It was okay. At least it was one ring and not two rings, though I like the two ring thing a little bit. And it was what it was. It wasn't anything great. Thankfully, the Battle Bowl concept got dropped pretty goddamn quickly. But at least it was in one ring. You had everybody there. It was what it was. It wasn't anything bad. Great Muta ended up winning it. So it's like you had the three winners were Sting in 91, Muta in 92, and then in 93 was Sid or Vader. It was one of the two. I think it might have been Sid, actually. Or no, it might have been Vader. But the bottom line is it was supposed to be, all these guys. Like 93 actually, which is weird because I did a review of it, but I totally forgot. That shows how important that pay-per-view was. The 92 Battle Royal, actually the Starrcade 92 event overall was pretty damn good. Battle Bowl 92, it was a little more polished than 91, but it was alright. It was a weird way to end it. And then we go to number 13, Battle Bowl 91. I like the two-ring concept. I mean, I didn't like the lethal lottery thing where you just, throw names in a hat and they draw, and whoever gets drawn together has to team up with their respective, the person that gets drawn next to them. So sometimes it's faces and faces, sometimes it's heated rivals, sometimes it's face and heel that don't really have any issue with each other. Sometimes the matches worked, sometimes they didn't. Being different, there's nothing wrong with that, but it didn't always work. And unfortunately, the lethal lottery concept still stuck into Slamboree, I want to say 95, 96. It might have actually even been around in 93, 93. I don't know if there was one. No, 93, 94. The bottom line is they did the lethal lottery concept a whole lot after this. So, Battle Bowl 91, though, you had a whole bunch of people in there, and it was like 20 guys, and it was a two-ring battle royal. And then people got eliminated in ring number 2, and then if it got tossed over the top rope, that was it. And then when it was down to one person in ring 1 and one person in ring 2, like Thing 1 and Thing 2, they would go at it, and whoever won the Battle Bowl and would win a title shot. Though, weirdly, Lex Luger was in there, and Lex Luger was the WCW champion at the time. So it came down to Luger and Sting. And Rick Rude, after getting eliminated, hit Sting, with the Rude Awakening, because they had just had a feud over the U.S. title recently, which was actually a pretty damn good feud. It actually stuck out in my mind quite a bit. I remember the Clash of Champions in November of 91. But anyway, came down to Sting and Luger, and Sting ended up eliminating Luger. And Well, the crowd popped, but at this point, I think they had just gotten out of the Jim Herd era, because I think Jim Herd left sometime in 91. I think he left sometime in 91. All I know is Jim Herd was a goddamn rotten piece of shit for what he did to Starrcade, and also Starrcade and WCW in general, because the guy didn't fucking know what he was fucking doing. He was a pizza guy. And I know something about being a pizza guy, not owning pizza, but eating pizza. I know that I would be lousy running WCW or running any company, especially WCW since it's no longer in business. I'd be lousy running a company, so I'm smart enough to know I'm not smart enough to ever be in wrestling, despite some of the stuff I say on this channel. Yeah, Battle Bowl 91 though, yeah, not all that good. And then we get to number 12, Flair versus Savage from Starrcade 95. Now, I want to say this. I enjoy, had it been the triple, had this match been on Nitro the next night, and had the triple threat between Sting, Luger, and Flair been, like, you know, the main event, because it was like a 28-minute match, and then whoever won would get to face Savage right afterwards. Had that been the main event, that would actually have been better, because that was a fucking terrific match. It really was. Sting and Luger had wrestled before, facing off against New Japan Pro Wrestling talents. And it's funny, Savage, I believe it was Savage actually faced off against Hiroshi Tenzan. And it's weird to see that Tenzan competed on Nitro, and he's still competing in 2019. That shows longevity right there. But it was a really short match. I think it was like 9 minutes. But then again, Flair had just wrestled 28 minutes. Savage had already wrestled, all that stuff. So it made sense. But then Flair won, so I'm ranking this a little bit lower because Flair won, and Savage had just won the world title like a month before. But they did have a hell of a feud. They really actually did. And then we get to a match that I have talked about before. Nash versus Goldberg at Starrcade 1998. Now, there'll be a playlist at the end of this video that you can click on that, you know, shows, like, you know, my full opinions on, like, you know, and retro reviews and stuff like that. I'll actually have two. I'll have one about, like, retro reviews of, like, you know, the Starrcades that I've done, and also one where I talk about this finish. Goldberg, at this point, the bubble was about ready to burst. Now, I would have still had him win, and then he could have smashed some people over and then lost the title eventually. Because he had only had the title about 5.5 months. But Nash was getting over. Some of the fans were starting to turn on Goldberg. There were Goldberg sucks chants. It was pretty loud. But still, the way they did this horseshit finish, people are interfering. It's suddenly a no disqualification match. Bam Bam Bigelow interferes. This kind of stuff, whatever. Security guard, you know, hits Goldberg with a stun gun, a shock stick. Apparently the Mountie interfered. Oh, wait, no, it was Scott Hall. Not good. Not good at all. Jackknife powerbomb 1, 2, 3. Goldberg losing here wasn't the issue. Because, again, streaks can end, and you can start either another streak or something. It's the way they did, and then they beat down Goldberg, and then suddenly he didn't mean a goddamn thing. By the Finger Poke of Doom episode, which is another retro review I did, I remember being so goddamn pissed off watching that, and it was like 17-year-old me, because it was right before my 18th birthday. I remember being so goddamn pissed, just thinking, and I mean, mind you, just as a fan, I'm like, Goldberg had been pushed, and they, you know, made this guy such a big deal, and now all of a sudden they're beating him down. Why the fuck should I care about anybody? And that's really what they did here. Not great, really wasn't all that good. But that's, and I mean, Nash won, and then he held the title for like a week or two, and great job. And then Hogan became champion in 1999. Can't imagine why WCW went the fuck out of business. Whoever the fuck came up with that idea is a goddamn idiot. Anyway, so another one I talked about, number 10, Hogan versus Sting, Starrcade 97. Had it actually gone the way it should have, Sting winning clean and not with all the horse shit, Hogan beating up Sting with his, you know, 1980s offense and stuff like that, had Sting won, not stupidly, and, you know, and they, you know, had Nick Patrick actually done the 1, 2, 3 count, you know, really quick, you know, 1, 2, 3, you know, that, instead of, so Sting lost clean, Hogan looks dominant, Sting looks like a doofus, Brett looks like an asshole because he starts the match all of a sudden, we're not going to have another screw-job finish. It wasn't a fast count. No matter how much they fucking pushed the fast count thing. And look, I don't know whose idea it was, but it was stupid. The idea might have worked had the execution been better. That's just, from a fan's perspective, it took a 15-month, you know, build. And it was about a 15-month build. It was pretty much from Fall Brawl 96 till like that point. And you could argue even since the NWO had formed. But Fall Brawl 96 in particular, so about 15-month build. And it just fucking shot to shit. And then the next night, Sting and Hogan do this feud thing where Hogan wins the title back, but then they do this thing and Hogan and Sting, the title's vacated, and then they have a match at Super Brawl. And I know that interviews have been done and stuff like that, and Bischoff's talked about it. Look, Bischoff's there, I wasn't. I'm just a fan. I'm just giving my opinion as a fan. I hated it. And it was bad. Yeah, sure, they got a big buy rate from it. They should have, because they built that thing up like crazy. Sure, the crowd went nuts, but there were some people. I actually talked to a few people a couple of years ago that went to that show. And they said, there was a loud reaction initially, but there were, he was with a group of friends. A friend of mine was. Like somebody I'd actually gone to school with in this sense. I don't know where the hell he is now. I haven't talked to him in years. But he talked to me about it and said, yeah, that was, he said the crowd leaving was like, they fucked that up, even though Sting won. And then they fucked it up even more on Nitro. But it was interesting to get a perspective from somebody, a friend of mine that had traveled over there and then had come back. And I finally heard from him about it. It was interesting to hear because I'd always wondered what it was like from the live crowd. But yeah, not the best use. Now we're going to get into better stuff. Hogan versus Piper in 1996. Well, Starrcade 96. Granted, technically was not that impressive. But Piper winning was great, even with all the interference of Giant and outsiders and that kind of stuff. Sure, it wasn't all that great, but the crowd was absolutely electric. Thanks, Chris. There's this, certain inside joke that him and I have, Chris, the Durbinator, my co-host. Every time I say it's electric, I just have this song pop into my head. So thank you for that. But with this, Piper winning was great. The crowd was absolutely fantastic. Work rate wise, sure, but absolute shit. The guys were way older. They were 10, 11 years older than they were when they clashed at WrestleMania 1. Well, 11 years older. Not that great. Technically, but as far as a big fight field, this was great. And Roddy winning was fantastic. So that's one of the reasons I got ranked here in the top 10. And then we get to number 8, Dusty Rhodes versus Ric Flair with Joe Frazier as a special guest referee. And that is from Starrcade 84. The fact that the referee stopped it due to blood, Dusty was cut over the eye and all that stuff, that wore it down a little bit for me. I don't think this is as good as their other clash. That's coming up here a little bit later. I will say that Dusty and Rick never had a bad match. This might have been the weakest of the big matches that they had, but it did have a really, big feel. I mean, people turned out for it, and it did really well box office-wise, and people watching it, I mean, I'm sure on closed circuit, I'm sure it did well. I'm sure that the live gate was very big. I don't know how big it would be. I forget what it was. I think there's a book by a guy named Mark James, if I recall correctly. Jim Cornette talked about him, where he's got like a book with all the figures and attendances and stuff like that ever were recorded. So maybe I might get that one of these days if it's still in print. And then I could tell people that stuff. But I can imagine that Dusty and Flair got a lot of people in there, and so did the undercard. Because Starrcade 84 unfortunately wasn't as great as Starrcade 83. And with this match, referee stoppage, good match for what it was, referee stoppage kind of wore it down for me. But then we get to number 7, Sting versus Flair from Starrcade 89. Yes, Starrcade 89 is very divisive. A lot of people didn't like the tag team and singles, small tournament that they did. I liked it, though I can totally see why some people didn't. I liked some of the fresh matches, and, some of the stuff was good for what it was. Some of it wasn't that great. I admit that. And poor Muda getting fucking jobbed out like crazy. That wasn't all that great. But Sting and Flair always had great chemistry, and Sting winning this was great, and it looked like Sting wouldn't win. The convoluted point system aside, because that was pretty goddamn shit. Only outdone by the Team Challenge Series. If you don't know what the AWA Team Challenge Series is, you're lucky. But Sting got the victory, celebrate and everything, all that. Well, the Horsemen are in the ring. They raise, Sting's hand, the 4 symbol, that kind of stuff. Sting joins 4 Horsemen for a cup of coffee, gets kicked out, and then unfortunately tears his knee 2 weeks before Wrestle War when he was going to beat Flair for the title. So then they had to turn, Luger, who I believe is the U.S. champion, they had to turn him face and wait till the Great American Bash 1990. Which was a good pay-per-view for what it was, but unfortunately it had El Gigante on it. Oh, God, Elegante. Yes, Elegante being involved in just about anything, just in the ring, just not good. But Sting versus Flair, maybe not their best match. Obviously, they would have better matches. Maybe not at Starrcade, because I believe it was the only time they faced off at Starrcade. But it was good for what it was, especially considering both guys had already wrestled a couple matches before. And then we get number 6. We get Ric Flair versus Ronnie Garvin. Hands of Stone, rugged Ronnie Garvin from 1987. Okay, maybe Ronnie Garvin wasn't exactly world championship material, but he worked really goddamn hard, and for a short-term champion, I didn't mind it. I mean, looking back on, mind you, I was only 6 years old when this happened, and I remember briefly being able to watch this stuff, because at the time I didn't have cable. Neighbor friend of mine, his uncle actually, was a big wrestling fan and everything, and so was, my friend, so we would just go over there and watch it. So on the weekends, I would go over and watch that, so if he could order the pay-per-views or do something or get tapes, we would watch it. So sometimes I'd watch a show on delay. And it was a lot of fun. Now, yeah, okay, you could argue maybe not the best, and Garvin beating Flair out of nowhere was a little bit ridiculous, but at least Flair and Garvin could work well together, and they could hit each other really goddamn hard. I mean, especially Garvin. I have no idea how people did not actually get legit hurt. Even though Garvin was a safe worker, he hit really hard. And so did Flair. I mean, those chops were no joke. It was a good match, though. Maybe not world championship material in some people's eyes, but I enjoyed it. And then we get number 5, Ric Flair versus Nikita Koloff from 1986. Unfortunately, Magnum TA suffered a very, very tragic injury that ended his career. Ended his career. It offended people because it ended his career. So, that was a nice recovery, wasn't it? This was a good match, though. Nikita being a babyface was a little bit weird, but at that point, he'd been a heel for so long. Vicious heel, and Flair facing Nikita, roles reverse and everything, actually was a good call. Now, you could argue Magnum versus Flair would have been better. And it certainly would have. I can't help but think that if they had given it to Magnum, would it have worked out? Who knows? Leave in the comments if you think it would have worked out for Magnum TA to be a world champion. It could have worked out short term. I don't know about long term. Now, Flair and Nikita, yeah, okay, it ended up being a bit of a fluky finish, but for the fact they had to make this up on the fly, it was a goddamn good match. And a big, big feel, and people wanted to see Nikita win it in the honor of Magnum TA. And Flair, nope, I'm the leader of the Four Horsemen, this kind of stuff, and, I'm going to keep this title and woo, and I can't woo like Ric Flair. No one can, honestly. But, seriously, I sound like a freaking dying snake. This was a good match, though. And number 4, Dusty versus Flair from 1985. A much, 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 much better match. Nothing against work rate in 1984. But again, that blood stoppage, referee stoppage, didn't care for it. This was really good. There was one idiot in the crowd, and I think it was an 85. It was 85 or 84. I think it was 85. But this one guy that was right near one of the cameras kept going, woo, woo, woo. He sounded like when Bender, in Futurama, like, and if you guys watch Futurama, you know what I'm talking about, but when they do this, what if machine, and Bender says, hey, what if I became human? And they show this little, short thing. It was a little anthology thing. And they show Bender becoming human, and then he becomes the size of a goddamn house, and he passes away during a party. And they said, well, he just said woo. And Professor says, no, that was just air escaping from the folds of his fat. And pushes him. It's like, woo. Took a long time to get to that joke. I'm not going to apologize, though, because it was funny. Dusty and Flair had a great match, though, and Dusty being able to beat Flair was the right call. I mean, I think they ended up doing a disputed finish thing with the title anyway, because I know Dusty won the NWA title a few times. It's a little murky, and I think he won it in 86, but he dropped it very soon after. This was good, though. I enjoyed it, and Dusty and Flair always had amazing chemistry. You could argue the promos might have actually been better than the matches. But that's just because both guys were such legendary talkers, or both guys, Dusty was and Flair is such a legendary, they are such legendary talkers. But the matches were just as good because even without doing as much, with charisma alone, they could get the people. And then we get to number 3. Ric Flair pretty much dominates almost the entire top 10. I didn't even fucking realize it. That's amazing. I didn't even realize that Flair dominated. So we got Flair versus Luger from 1988 Starrcade, and I'm not fond of giving credit to Luger, but Flair may have gotten his best matches out of him. Seriously. Luger looked like a goddamn $1,000,000. He looked like he actually knew what the fuck he was doing. Before he had a hand in him offing Liz. But wrestling ability, just focusing on that, Rick knew how to get the best out of somebody. He made Luger look great, and even in 31 minutes, Flair did manage to get the win. So that concluded like their summer program, because it was Great American Bash 88. I want to say Great American Bash 88, then they had a house show run and stuff like that after the Great American Bash tour. And then they rekindled it for, they actually kept it going like a bit. I mean, Flair would wrestle other people, but then they, blew it off and everything at Starrcade. And Starrcade 88, admittedly, the first Starrcade that was actually around Christmas and not on Thanksgiving. It did really well as far as ratings, business, that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, things headed downhill for a few years. This was a really, really good main event, though. And then we get to number 2, Ric Flair versus Harley Race in 1983, the first Starrcade main event. People are probably going to be purists will probably be pissed I didn't put this number 1. This is really like 1A, because it's all about preference. You go with this, or you go with my number 1 choice. Gene Kiniski is a special guest referee, former NWA champion. It had an absolutely big fight feel. Sure, Kiniski maybe tried to enforce the rules a little too much in a motherfucking cage match, but Kiniski did have so much star power to it. Harley had been champion for a good while, and maybe not just in that reign in particular, but he 7-time world champion, 8 times actually, because he beat Flair in 84 for a little bit, but it just wasn't recognized by the NWA. Oh dear. But it was still a really good match, and great and bloody and that kind of stuff. And Ric Flair being the babyface, Flair for the gold, all that. Ric Flair got the victory, and yeah, Kiniski again, the way he tried to enforce the rules a little too much in the cage match. I could say that might be actually part of the reason why I knocked it down, just put it out at number 1. But you can't argue this wasn't a massive, massive main event, and just the perfect way to kick off Starrcade. But number 1, and it's one I've talked about, so I'm only gonna be brief. Ric Flair versus Vader from Starrcade 93. Supposed to be Sid Vicious versus Vader. I love Sid. I don't think that would have been very good. I think it would have been okay, and people say, oh, well, judging by the pre-tapes or whatever, Sid possibly could have won. It would have been cool to see Sid be world champion at that point, but then the whole scissoring incident happened. The stabbing with the scissors with Arn and Sid, I really should clarify my stuff on here for those people that don't know, because then you might wonder what the fuck I'm talking about being, with a scissoring incident between 2 burly guys. Moving on. Ric Flair and Vader, though, as it's kind of like a ready, it's like a makeshift match with the way they built it, and throughout the entire night, Ric Flair being interviewed by Mean Gene, all the personal stuff, him leaving his house, all his personal stuff in there, making it feel like it was Ric Flair's final match. Like, if he didn't win, he'd have to retire. And even if he won, he might get his ass kicked. He even got his tooth chipped at one point. But he did get the victory. He managed to pin Vader. It was a great fucking match. David Goliath match. It was really goddamn good. So that's going to sum that up. So yeah, I went off on a few tangents here, but I hope you enjoyed this video. Me covering 18 Starrcade main events. So agree, disagree what I said. How would you have ranked them? And what do you think about WWE bringing Starrcade back? Should they bring it back as a network special maybe, or should they just let this stuff die? Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Ritlin. I will see you soon.